Canada is truly the least serious country in the Western world, and I would argue someone like that of Justin Trudeau being the front runner for this nation makes this a perfect example of exactly that. Don't get me wrong, you could certainly make the argument with the fact that the United States has nothing more than a puppet on marionette strings as their leader, but even with that, it is better than that of Fidel Castro's son, Justin Trudeau, the leader of Canada. Well, the thing is, this country has been utterly falling apart, and whether it goes from the standards being pushed against the citizenry of Canada itself around their speech, or it be surrounding the fact of pushing euthanasia laws on both the mentally disabled and the youth, well, it appears that this is what it looks like when a society truly begins to crumble from the inside, and done so through the ridiculous and insane policies put forward by the Machiavellian tricksters who are ruling over you. Let's go ahead and jump in and see why Canada is not a serious country. We'll be starting this off here with Justin Trudeau, and I felt this was just ever relevant to the fact of what's been going on in this country and how he's been pushing the standards upon the people of Canada in an attempt to crack down on them so they have no ability to reach information freely as well as think freely nor operate as free citizens in their country. Here we see Canada's Trudeau believes there's a deliberate undermining of mainstream media by conspiracy theorists. And what does he mean by this? Well, if you're someone who's willing to carefully step outside the spectrum of allowable opinion to try and find truth and actual knowledge in the pursuit of understanding what's going on in the world, detached from the narrative that is being delivered to you by the regime and many of its outlets, well, don't you realize that what you're going to do is cause nothing more than the bifurcation of the country? And in doing so, Justin Trudeau will do nothing more than malign you as a conspiracy theorist, as he has consistently done. And there's no better example of the fact of how Justin Trudeau and his government are cracking down in the most totalitarian of fashions as of late than what we see here. Canadian law endorsed by the Trudeau government could imprison people for life for speech crimes. I did not misread that. You did not mishear it. Imprison people for life for speech crimes, which do not exist. We jump now back into this clip of Justin Trudeau, Fidel Castro's bastard son, explaining the problems of people undermining the mainstream media, and what he means by that is the regime. It's truly wild. Let's go ahead and preface this, I suppose. I don't actually believe that Justin Trudeau is Fidel Castro's son, but get you a woman who looks at you the way that Justin Trudeau's mother looked at Fidel Castro. That's all I'm going to say.
There is out there a deliberate undermining of mainstream media. There are the conspiracy theorists, there are the social media drivers who are trying to do everything they can to keep people in their little filter bubbles, to prevent people from actually agreeing on a common set of facts, the way, the CBC and CTV, when they were our only sources of news, used to project across the country at least a common understanding of things.
It's so funny that he doesn't even realize what he's doing, which is giving away the entirety of the game. He's like, well, when we only had these 3 outlets and people had no other sources of information, everyone just had a common understanding of things. It's like, yeah, because they were getting pumped full of propaganda by the establishment, which the Canadian media was nothing more than a mouthpiece for. We jump over now to see Justin Trudeau's use of the Emergencies Act to quell protests has been ruled unconstitutional by a federal court in Canada. And what they're talking about here was Justin Trudeau using the Emergencies Act to go after what? The people who were protesting him with the vaccine mandates that were being pushed with the massive Canadian truckers protest that was then unfolding in the country. And here we can see the update pushing forward saying Deputy PM says Trudeau's government will appeal the federal court's ruling because they believe invoking the Emergencies Act was right and necessary at the time.
So we are aware of the court decision. We have discussed it with the Prime Minister, with cabinet colleagues, with senior federal government officials and experts. We respect very much Canada's independent judiciary. However, we do not agree with this decision, and respectfully, we will be appealing it. I would just like to take a moment to remind Canadians of how serious the situation was in our country when we took that decision. The public safety of Canadians was under threat. Our national security, which includes our national economic security, was under threat. It was a hard decision to take. We took it very seriously, after a lot of hard work, after a lot of careful deliberation. We were convinced at the time, I was convinced at the time, it was the right thing to do. It was the necessary thing to do. I remain, and we remain, convinced of that.
For quite some time, I've sat here talking about the fact of how Canada is no longer a serious country, and people akin to that of Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau, well, they most certainly sell that standard for me, considering Chrystia Freeland being nothing more than a bloviating gas bag of a human being without a singular thought in her head. I would argue having two brain cells fighting for third place, but that's a conversation for a different day. Here we jump onto the post-millennial and we see Pierre Poilievre on the Liberals' online censorship bill. What does Justin Trudeau mean when he says the word hate speech? He means speech he hates. And that's absolutely true. And we can tie this back to what we saw with that bill, where they weren't specifically going after hate speech. They were going after speech crimes with the ability to lock you in jail for the entirety of your life for the fact that you dare say something that offended the regime and Justin Trudeau. Now let's go ahead, throw this into Pierre Poilievre. And this is something that's been quite interesting only for the fact that I've been talking for so long about how the Canadian revolutionary spirit has effectively been pacified to the point of, well, nothing more than utter subjugation, but it does appear that there is a rumbling within the spirit of the people of Canada, and with it the fire may once again be lit. And people like Pierre here are most certainly the voice on the front line who are willing to stand there and take the arrows for the people of Canada, standing up to the Trudeau government and all of the censorship that is being consistently pushed out by that regime. Let's go ahead, throw it into this clip, and then we'll move on to these articles to close out this video.
The federal government has said that its online harms bill is imminent. They've said this bill will include, among other things, a ban on so-called online hate speech. As you know, the Conservatives a decade ago repealed Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act, which the Liberals have talked about reintroducing and tried in the last parliamentary term. Will the Conservatives oppose the reintroduction of these provisions and the Liberals' approach to so-called online hate speech?
Yes, we will oppose Justin Trudeau's latest attack on freedom of expression. And I want to ask, what does Justin Trudeau mean when he says the word hate speech? He means speech he hates. So, for example, let's go through some of the things he said is hate speech. Jerry Butts, the PMO puppet master, said that it was hate speech to criticize Trudeau for using the ridiculous term people kind, right? Justin Trudeau said anyone who criticized him during the pandemic was engaging in hate speech. Basically, anybody who disagrees with his radical agenda when it comes to kids, he says is hate speech. He attacked Muslim parents who were protesting against his agenda. Is he going to criminalize those Muslim parents for protecting their children in schools? Go down the list of things that Justin Trudeau disapproves of, and you can imagine all of the things that will be criminalized. Then there becomes the question of who is going to be in charge of determining what is hate speech. Recently, a school board in Ontario banned Anne Frank's books. Okay, so would that be considered hate speech under Justin Trudeau's woke authoritarian agenda? I think it would. So anyone who thinks that speech they don't like is going to be criminalized and therefore the bill should be supported, go through that. Those people should go through the list of their own thoughts that Justin Trudeau considers to be unacceptable views, and you can assume that he will ban all of that as well.
Pierre's absolutely right. You should run yourself through the list of thoughts that you would consider that Justin Trudeau might deem hate speech or unlawful speech, and then realize that he will use these laws to go after you as well. And Pierre has actually been quite an impressive person as of late. There are multiple different videos of him in different interviews with journalists, and one of the most, I would say, interesting but funny ones that reveals the nature of how the media operates is he's sitting there eating an apple, talking to this reporter, effectively giving one-word answers. The reporter's doing nothing more than volleying nonsensical accusations at him, and he's doing the simplest of things. Asking who, what, when, where, why, how. Simple things like that. The reporter can give no context to back up the slander that they're trying to push upon him, and he makes them look like a dundering dumbass, as certainly most in the mainstream media absolutely are. Here we jump onto Politico and see. Pierre Poilievre is the man who could beat Trudeau. Canada's brashest conservative is surging in the polls. His biggest problem, an election could be 2 years away. So, this article written roughly 9-10 months ago, so let's say a year and some change until the Canadian election, and I'm not going to sit here and act like I know a bunch about Canadian politics. As I've stated, I do not take it as a serious country, but if I'm talking about this stuff, I should realistically start reading a bit more. So, the thing that I think is so revealing about all of this is that when you see an authoritarian government crack down upon its society, it starts to break down in little ways. And I think there's no better glowing example of this than what's been going on with Canada's MAID program, and that of medical assistance in dying, which is euthanasia by choice, and how freely this is being pushed upon so many people. We jump over here to the National Post and we see more than 13,200 Canadians died by assisted suicide in 2022, 30% more than the previous year. In 2022, 30% more Canadians chose medical assistance in dying, bringing the total number of MAID deaths in Canada since 2016 to 44,958. Absolutely disgusting. There is no other way to put it. This is a sign of anything but a healthy society in the West. And man, let's just go ahead and address the fact of suicide real quick. If you're someone who's suffering, you feel that there's nothing more than turmoil in your soul, and you feel there's no way out, and you're dealing with suicidal ideation, please go talk to someone. You matter. People love you, and it's important that you realize it. Even if it's people you don't know, I promise you, we care about you, because you matter more than you realize. And those in your life, I can guarantee, would far rather themselves be nothing more than a pillar to lean on and a shoulder to cry on than them leaning over upon your casket and crying over your corpse. You matter, people love you, and with that, you have to realize that life is worth living, and sometimes it simply seems there's no way out. But in the end, there is always a light at the end of the tunnel. And if you're someone who feels you have no one to talk to, you don't have a way to get any of this out, you feel like you have no one that cares, send me a DM on Twitter. You talk to me, and that's fine. I won't tell anyone about anything. It doesn't matter, because that's no one else's business but yours. And if you're willing to talk to me and you want me to be a shoulder to lean on so that you have someone to at least to vent to about these things, fine, so be it. Doesn't matter what time of day, doesn't matter how long the message, I will gladly sit there and talk to you about whatever you need, because you have to realize that people care about you. And to the people out there who are sitting there with those that they know who are suffering, the onus is on you to be that pillar, to be that shoulder to cry on. So go be a good person, because in doing so, you will realize that that will only make you stronger, and possibly one of the greatest things that you could do in this is save a life. So please, go tell someone if you're suffering, and if you're someone who sees someone suffering, make sure you're the person that's willing to stand up to stop them from being the one who's willing to walk towards the bridge. And if they are on that bridge, be the one who's willing to sit there and have the conversation with them, because they matter and they need to know that they are loved. Let's go ahead and just get back into the rest of this. We jump into the Daily Mail and we see disabled Canadian Army veteran Paralympian blasts government for offering to euthanize her when she complained about how long it was taking to install stairlift at her home. I'm not kidding. This is real. This is not an exaggeration in the slightest. This is what is being pushed by the standards of Canada's euthanasia program under that of MAID, medical assistance in dying. And well, if you thought that this was only going to be it, I guarantee you, the sliding scale has truly been quite insane, to the point where they were willing to push this on people who were mentally ill, those who did not have the rational faculties about them, but they were still willing to allow them to make what would be the most pivotal decision of their life, which would be ending their life. But we jump over here to the New York Post and see Canada halts controversial assisted suicide program for mentally ill due to lack of doctors willing to participate. What's that? It wasn't that the government said this is completely immoral and unethical, that we're pushing suicide upon people who do not have their rational faculties, and because of this, no ability to actually discern the nature of reality properly and make decisions for themselves that are properly rationalized? But we're still going to go ahead and push suicide upon them? No, it wasn't the government. It was the doctor saying, I will not participate nor condone these actions, and I will not be involved in something as horrific as this. Well, that's not the only place where the sliding scale has continued to evolve. We jump now over here to see Canada's MAID policy is facilitating death by poverty. And this is actually quite interesting, and it talks about the fact of how the people in Canada are suffering economically to the point where they're opting into suicide rather than sitting there and being homeless, which the people of Canada effectively being tyrannized through the process of the socialization of their government and effectively having so much of the value of their labor stripped from them with no capacity to actually create wealth. Well, this is only leading to so many people feeling like there's no way out. They're in a hole, they're in a debt spiral, and because of that, they're opting in for suicide, which is genuinely depressing and tragic. But what's even more depressing and tragic than that is the fact that child euthanasia without parent consent has been approved for Canada. This is unbelievable. The fact that this is something not only being pushed onto people who are mentally ill, who cannot rationalize and make decisions properly for themselves, but children who cannot consent to actions that will have long-term ramifications, period, because they do not have the rational faculty to construct their understanding of the world. We won't even allow kids to get tattoos, but we'll allow them to walk up and make the decision that they no longer want to live at the behest of what? Nothing more than their own will being condoned by the government of Canada. And what? Done so without the approval of their parents, without consent from their parents, thus making the argument by proxy that children can consent. Let's address that. So, think about how the most horrific and awful human beings among all of society would be willing to take that line of logic that children can consent, take that inch and run that mile, drop that goalpost and say, well, this is the standards that we operate under now. And you can most certainly see that sliding scale already happen. People need to realize that the slippery slope fallacy is anything but a fallacy. We jump now over here. Should assisted dying be extended to minors? Not so fast, some experts warn. Okay, not some experts. I want to address this. What experts are condoning this? What experts are saying, you know what, I think this is actually a pretty solid idea that we could go ahead and push medical assistance in dying, aka government-assisted suicide, onto children. Oh, and by the way, we'll even do so without getting the consent and approval of their parents. What experts are we dealing with that are actually saying this is a standard that should be put forward? Because this is a perfect example of why so many people no longer trust the medical health establishment, not just for the fact of what is being pushed upon them through the entirety of the COVID era with the medical tyranny thrust upon so many, specifically in places like Canada, which is what we saw the trucker protest end up unfolding about, which was about vaccine mandates for the truckers specifically, many of which already being vaccinated, but they did not believe it was right the government would have the ability to mandate these things, and in doing so, they stood up to the Trudeau government, which was a major red flag for the Trudeau government to realize that they're going to have to crack down on the people of Canada even harder, which is why we see so much of these speech laws now unfolding. Isn't it insane that this is the point that we're at? Like I said, we live in a dystopian clown world. Now to Al Jazeera. Canada's assisted dying regime should not be expanded to include children. As a physician and a mother, I lose sleep over the prospect of mature minors being allowed to take part in controversial MAID programs. Yeah, I would argue a perfectly reasonable standard to lose sleep over, especially if you're a doctor who would be involved in this process. So here's the thing. This is what always gets me, and this never fails to piss me off. The moniker of mature minors being used to describe children. No, they are children, they are kids, they are younglings. Period, point blank, end of conversation, end of the story. There is no more discussion to be had about this. Oh, dude, this boils my fucking piss so much. Because the fact is that the way that this will be justified by the most vile cretinous of human beings to rationalize their actions, well, I'm sure you can do the mental gymnastics to understand the process of how they would break this down to try and justify the fucking despicable things that they would be willing to do. And those people do not deserve any bit of leeway. What they deserve is a wall. Now we jump over to the last article to finish this off from the Canadian Independent. Exclusive. Ontario woman paralyzed after Moderna booster shot. Doctors attribute cause to vaccine, then offer her MAID. So, Kayla Pollock who is a 37-year-old, got her Moderna booster shot and apparently received a vaccine side effect from it, which, don't worry, YouTube, the vaccine is purely safe and effective. It is the greatest medical treatment ever created. If you get the vaccine, you cannot get COVID nor spread it to other people. It is the safest pharmacological invention ever created throughout the history of mankind. All right, now that we're done with that, so what we see is after she had been hit by these ramifications, they then offered her MAID, medical assistance in dying, government-assisted euthanasia. Yeah, we just got to get rid of the evidence. I'm going to go ahead and call it there. Thank you for watching. If you got this far, thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. Stay lovely, stay great, tell someone you love them, and never forget, anyone that says minors can consent or anything along the lines of the fact that a minor can be anything near that of what it would mean to be mature, and they're trying to use this as conditioning to push forward the standards of God knows what, realize that that person is a villain and they need to have their fucking hard drive checked.